Let's bring in our panel to discuss the future of ISIL. Here in our studio, Ruwan Al-Rejoleh is a political analyst. Also with us, Christopher Preble is the Vice President for Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. From Athens, Judit Neurink is an author and expert in ISIL. And from Munich, Jurgen Todenhofer is a journalist who spent 10 days embedded with the extremist group. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Judit Neurink, let me start with you in Athens. So ISIL has announced a successor to Abu Bakr Al-Baghdadi, who reportedly killed himself during that raid. The new leader is named as Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi. What do we know, Judith, about the organizational structure of ISIS and this new leader?
Well, let's start with the simple thing about the structure. We know that the Caliph, the head, so also this new leader, is going to lead quite a bit of what's going on, but from a distance. He has his deputies that are far more important, and we have seen also that ISIS is very well capable of working on its own without a leader being on top of it. About the new leader, we really don't know anything. We just got a name. There have been ideas of who it might be, but we don't know. And that's not so strange, because that was the same with Al-Baghdadi when he became the leader of ISIS. So we only got to know him when he walked into the mosque in Mosul and declared the caliphate. That's from that moment we knew what he looked like, and we started to know a bit more about him, where he was born, etc. But about the new leader, for the moment, no, we don't know anything.
Judith, when you say the new leader is going to be running the organization from a distance, what do you mean by that?
Well, I guess that he will do what Al-Baghdadi also did. He will not be on the phone or through internet in contact with his people. They will be sending messages to and fro, because Al-Baghdadi was very scared about being found out by his mobile phone or by internet. So he made very clear that all the contact was personal through people that he trusted. Now that worked for all that time until, of course, he was betrayed, because that's the reason why they could finally find him. Now, I would think that his successor is going to take the same strategy.
Okay, let's go to Jurgen Todenhofer in Munich. And Jurgen, you've spent time with ISIL. In fact, you were embedded with them for a little while. The organization has largely lost the caliphate that it had at one time, but it has expanded its reach beyond Iraq and Syria. What, in your view, is the status of this group right now?
I think they have lost a big battle. I think it was over with Mosul. I was at this time in Mosul. They have lost the territory of the caliphate. This was a big defeat. For example, in Germany, they have lost their prestige. Their prestige in Germany is quite zero. But they're still very strong in the Middle East. So ISIS is not defeated. And just to make a remark, I also think that he was not running ISIS, but he played his role from a distance. I asked the ISIS fighters, the guys, the terrorists from the media department, what would happen if one day he's killed, and they said, no difference. Nothing will change. You know, he doesn't play this big role that you think in the Western country. He's not that important. And I believe that when he was killed some days ago, he was already retired. He wasn't the man in command. He was in a position like bin Laden when he was killed in Abbottabad. So it's not a very, very important thing for ISIS that he has been killed, and they will continue. And ISIS is an ideology, and you cannot shoot ideologies. You have to take their arguments away, and you have to prove them wrong, and you have to be fair. And if you are fair, if they live in a fair society, in a fair world, they have no chance. But in a world like in all these Middle East countries with that unfairness, let me just ask a question. I was there when Mosul was completely destroyed. So a guy who lost his his parents, his brothers, his sisters, his house. What will he love after having lost everything, the house, the family? Will he be a fan of our civilization, or will he become a terrorist? That's just a question.
Christopher, what do you make of those points that you can't fight an ideology? You cannot really defeat a group like ISIL.
Right, you can kill bad guys,
Yeah.
which the United States has done for some time and it seems to have had some success. The question, of course, is, and then what? If the ideology stems from more than just the individuals, which it clearly does, then what is the plan for addressing the underlying grievances that drive this? And I think that the United States has not, and not just the United States, but the world as a whole, has not done a really good job of coming to grips with these grievances, which the other guest noted. And of course, the chaos and violence that was unleashed both by the Iraq War and then the ensuing Arab uprisings is a further breeding ground for radicalism and resentment.
Ruwan, we heard about the raid over the weekend. The White House announced what had taken place. This is what the White House advisor, Jared Kushner, said about the death of Al-Baghdadi. Let's listen to this.
To kill the leader of ISIS is a very, very big step forward. So killing the leader was a very big symbolic victory. I think it was very, very big for America, big for the world, big for the region. But at the end of the day, we still have more work to do.
So how much of a setback was this for ISIS? As Jurgen Todenhofer told us, it appears that Al-Baghdadi had largely retired. But do they still have a reach?
That's very interesting. I want to draw back on who is this new guy, because that can give us a glimpse of the future.
Yeah.
Actually, some Arabic reports stated the background of this person. It seems that he's apparently the same guy who was named Abdullah Qurdash. His real name is Abu Omar Turkmani. He comes from a Turkmen descent. It's still not proved. However, it makes more sense because of, now all the, the Telegram accounts are talking about him. The interesting part of this is the way forward of the new form or the new leadership of this, that this person is gonna conduct, is that he was the head of the security division of ISIS, and he was specialized in explosives. So one of the reports stated that his nickname is the Destructive. I believe that the new era of, let's say, ISIS 2.2, or as they like to call it, 3.0, is going to be more vicious, and it's going to be more decentralized, and that's the whole idea of the rise of, a global version of ISIS. And in my own opinion, although ISIS was raised from AQI, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq,
right.
However, tactically and ideologically, it's not different from, what al-Zawahiri used to do or Osama bin Laden. So I think we should not be lost with the names. I think we should look at the tactics and also at the bigger picture. I agree about the grievances and the unfairness, but that's where the West the West should take responsibility of this messy situation.
What do you make of Jurgen's point that they've largely lost their influence in Europe but still remain strong in the Middle East?
I think I tend to agree and disagree at the same time, because if we look at the foreign fighters that they came from Europe, and if we look at the foreign fighters that now families, women that are now in Makhayam al-Hol camp, it reflects that the integration policies in Europe in general is challenging, and we have a problem. Why would be a second generation French or British would come all the way to fight and look for this kind of what is called khilafah. Also, in terms of the Middle East, yes, because of the incubator, the local incubator for such extreme organizations, because of the people feel shamed and defeated, and that's why they want to hold on to this to their history,
right.
I want to compare it to Europe, the formation. That time of history. So it makes sense, but then this is, we should, yes, it's ideology and also the underlying grievances, as the guests talked about.
Right, okay.
But I think we should take responsibility.
Judit Neurink, if we get back to the raid during which Al-Baghdadi apparently killed himself, could you give us some idea of the lay of the land where this took place? I mean, he was found near Idlib. Firstly, were you surprised that he was found near Idlib?
Yeah, we were all quite surprised, really. Although in the beginning of the year there had been reports that he might be there, but Idlib Al-Qaeda groups are there, or former Al-Qaeda groups, and they're not really friendly towards ISIS. So we didn't expect him to be there. Actually, I expected him to be in Iraq, because what we knew about Baghdadi is that he wanted to be near to a place where he could trust people, where he would feel at home. And now he was a guest of one of the leaders of one of those organizations that are active in Idlib. So that's quite a different situation. But as far as we know, that he was in March, there was the last battle in Syria, in Baghouz, and around that time he must have been transported through Syria to Idlib, which tells you something about also how much logistics, how much people ISIS still has. If they can smuggle him from there through territory, mainly of the Kurds, and nobody knows where he's going, where he is, then it tells you that they have enough people, and still people that can be trusted.
Jurgen Todenhofer, as we heard in our report at the beginning of the show, it was a power vacuum in Iraq and Syria that led to ISIL capturing territory and declaring its caliphate. But now circumstances have changed. Syria, of course, has the backing of Russia. We have Turkey, which has crossed the border, created its own safe zone, the 20-mile safe zone along the border. What does this mean for ISIL? Can it survive under these circumstances?
I think in Syria the chances for ISIS now are not as big as in Iraq. In Syria, ISIS is not very important now, but they're strong. In Iraq, not only because of the bombardments, they can say we have survived the attack of 90 countries from the whole world, the bombardments. We are the survivors, we are very strong. And there's another problem in Iraq, that's the problem between Sunnis and Shias, and a lot of people, especially Sunnis from the province Anbar, where they have been defeated already once, the Sunnis feel discriminated. And ISIS has a strong support from the Sunnis in Iraq. So in Iraq, their chances are better than, I think, in Syria. But they are also very strong in other countries, like in Afghanistan or like in Yemen. When I was in Yemen, in the southern part of Yemen and in the northern part of Yemen, it was the Houthis. One of my biggest threats or dangers, even in the south, was ISIS. There is Al-Qaeda in the Yemen, but also ISIS. But young people think ISIS is more fascinating because they have been fighting against the whole world. And this fascination is dead, I think, in Germany, and not very strong in the other European countries, but it's still very strong in the Middle East.
Chris, if we look at the future of ISIL and this region, the Syria-Turkish border region, the raid on ISIL came just a few days after President Trump announced that he was redeploying United States troops from Syria to Iraq.
Right.
Now we hear that there are U.S. troops going back to the region to safeguard oil fields there. What is the U.S. strategy?
I think that the United States obviously became more heavily involved in the region after having withdrawn forces from Iraq in 2011. It became more heavily involved after ISIS expanded their territorial control, took Mosul and spread their reach, and also, of course, killed famously several Americans. Those sorts of incidents drew the United States' attention and drew the United States back into the region. At the same time, the United States was caught between a desire to defeat this organization, which was also a mortal threat to, or potentially to Assad's government in Damascus, and so the whole process of aligning with different groups inside of the Syrian civil war brought the United States in conflict ultimately with a Turkish ally. It's a very complicated process. I think the United States should have focused much more narrowly on a specific achievable mission in conjunction with the other countries in the region. ISIL had taken territory from Syria and Iraq. These two countries confronted a mortal threat to their regime. And one way or the other, the pressure on that organization sort of squeezed the caliphate, sort of reduced the territory under control, and ultimately made it more easy to ultimately carry out this attack. Once that territory has been squeezed and taken back by the various by Iraq and Syria and the Turks, then it seems to me the U.S. role in the region is much diminished, and appropriately so.
Ruwan, go ahead.
I want to comment about your guest in Germany. I think that it's if we want to have partners to defeat the ideology, I think that we should be very careful when we talk about the Sunnis, and it's a Sunni grievances versus the Shiite grievances, and there is a support among the Sunnis. Abbottabad documents that were taken after the raid on Osama bin Laden had some evidence that Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, supported and hosted Osama bin Laden, and it's a Sunni Shiite thing that has nothing to do with the sectarian. But I think that for ISIS now, the type of shape of the new, let's say, new organization is going to be decentralized, and they will rely on the grievances and the unfairnessness to using some kind of extreme explanation and interpretation of a very, I would say, a peaceful religion, which is Islam, to justify it. I don't think it's a Sunni version. I don't think that it's fair to say it's a Sunni versus Shiite. I think we can see jihadism on the Shiite as well. So that's something I wanted to comment on.
Jurgen, you want to respond to that?
Can I say, yeah? Yeah, I think very fair with the Sunnis and the Shias, but during the 10 days I lived with these terrorists, and I spent day and night discussing with them. One of their big targets was to kill all the Shias, to kill millions of Shias. And it was always in their mind. I don't say that that's good, but
I am
is a
Sunni.
Problem that
I am Sunni, and I don't want to kill Shiite.
Of the Sunnis, but I say that I just say that that's not a fault of Sunnis, but these terrorists I met, and I met a lot, hated Shias. I think where we were talking, what can we do? I think our whole Western strategy to fight terrorism is completely wrong. I was a judge in my younger days against German terrorists. You know, you don't defeat terrorists with wars by bombarding them. You can defeat them with the classical strategies of counterterrorism, which is infiltration, money. And if you look, how was bin Laden defeated? By a war? By bombarding? No. By the classical means of counter-terrorism, with a strategy, with infiltration, with money. And Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, there was also money which persuaded a betrayer. And these are the strategies to defeat them.
Those
and
are
at
security,
the end,
they are security
a fair
strategies.
society, and the society in this.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Ron.
They are security strategies, and I agree with you, but also if we are to admit that there are grievances among local societies in the Middle East, I think that the discussion and the argument should be beyond infiltration, and it should be beyond security. We should talk about, the political engagement, why they are feeling neglected, how can we engage them, how can Sunni partners, denounce these things. That's why my point is, like, we cannot, generalize the Sunni. They are terrorists. I think that we should push back on that. Thank you.
All right, I want to get back to Judit Neurink in Athens. And Judit, looking at the current makeup of ISIL, there is part of this group, a subset of ISIL fighters, if I could call them that we don't often hear about, and those are the women in this terrorist group. I saw one report that said that women are among the staunchest supporters of ISIL, and although they have been victims themselves of the organization, that they will seek revenge for the caliphate. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it's very good that you come to this, because I think this is really the big problem that we are facing. There is all these people, 70,000 in Syria, about 50,000 in Iraq. Some people say there are about 200,000 people just in Iraq who have been involved with ISIS. These people who are imprisoned, and they don't get any therapy, de-radicalization program. They are in cells that are too small. Many of them are suffering from hunger. This is really the big threat, and amongst them, the women are very interesting, because the women in the last phase of the battle of ISIS were allowed to fight, which in the beginning they were not. And some of the most radical of them are now in one of the camps in Syria. And they are really waiting for their moment to get back.
Christopher, there is one perception of the United States' involvement in this part of the Middle East, and that is that it's an ally that cannot be trusted because it abandoned its Kurdish allies when it pulled its troops out. What does this do for U.S. credibility?
I think the credibility argument is trotted out pretty routinely whenever the United States changes its position on anything, frankly. And I think the Turks would say that the United States wasn't a very credible ally when they were complaining about us arming the PKK. Again, it was more complicated than that. That's a gross oversimplification. But I think this calls attention to the fact that the United States has made multiple commitments to multiple parties, and occasionally those commitments come into conflict. That's clearly what happened in the case of Syria. It is not an excuse by any stretch for the betrayal that the United States perpetrated against the Syrian Kurds. What makes it worse, of course, is that the Trump administration, at least members of the Trump administration, were actively counseling the Kurds against cutting the kinds of deals that were essential to protecting them from what has happened to them over the last few years. Ultimately, that means reconciling differences with the government in Damascus. That ultimately is going to have to be the solution. Preferably in some kind of multilateral dialogue. And there is an Astana process the United States has actively tried to thwart, and that process might ultimately be sort of re-engaged, it seems to me, again, but not the United States playing a large role in that.
Jurgen, one very quick point, just a few seconds left. The United States military estimates that there are about 18,000 ISIL fighters. That includes 3,000 foreign fighters. Could the death of Al-Baghdadi have the unintended consequence of energizing the movement and acting like something of a recruitment poster for them?
No, it doesn't play really a role. Al-Baghdadi was not the great figure, a big figure. But just to say one word to the gentleman who spoke before, I think, who has lost this war and who has won this war? The idea, you were talking about America, the United States. Americans wanted the system, the Assad system, to be defeated because this system is a pro-Iranian system. And they have lost this battle. They have lost it completely. The influence of Iran is now stronger. The influence of Russia is there. And the big loser, who's talking about victories by killing a leader of a terrorist group, the big loser in this long war, which started in 2011, is the United States. The United States have lost every influence in Syria they had before, and they had chances to have more influence. There were ideas to work together with the Americans. I met several times Assad, who preferred maybe the Western countries to other countries, but he got no chance, and now the Americans have lost this battle.
10 seconds, Chris.
I don't see it was a victory that the United States would ever have won. I don't exactly understand what it is the United States would have won in Syria. What exactly were we winning? I disagree to the extent that I never saw a victory in
No, you didn't win. You didn't win in Syria.
Okay.
I didn't think we could.
Yeah.
Can I?
Very quickly.
Syria has been always a Russian territory. I don't think that from the beginning, from during Mr. Obama time, that we really wanted to be part of this.
And we are definitely going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week, we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists, and others. It's a fresh, focused, and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict, or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.